Day 1 of the 2026 Australian Grand Prix already gave us an early glimpse of the competitive picture for this season. On the surface, the standout name on the timesheet was Oscar Piastri. The McLaren driver finished FP2 at the top with a fairly clear margin of around 0.2 of a second. In front of his home crowd in Melbourne, Piastri looked extremely comfortable extracting performance from the car, particularly on qualifying-style runs. But when you look at the overall picture across the day, the most convincing performance arguably came from Ferrari. In FP1, Ferrari immediately sent a strong signal by locking out the top two positions with Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. What made that result interesting wasn't just the timesheet itself, but the way the car behaved on track. The SF26 looked stable over the curbs, had very strong traction out of the slower corners, and didn't appear overly sensitive to changing track conditions. When the session moved into FP2 and other teams started to reveal more of their pace, Ferrari was no longer at the very top. Mercedes showed strong speed through Kimi Antonelli and George Russell, while McLaren eventually found its performance window with Piastri. But Ferrari still remained very close to the front group without looking like it was pushing the car particularly hard. Meanwhile, Red Bull appeared less settled across the day, still searching for a consistent balance. So, if we're looking for the team that already seems to have one of the most complete packages heading into this weekend, Ferrari clearly sits in a very strong position. Which raises the key question: are Ferrari genuinely at the front at the start of this new 2026 regulation era? Or is this just a misleading picture from the opening day of practice? In this video, we'll break down the data from day one and explain why Ferrari looked so impressive. And if you enjoy this kind of F1 analysis, consider subscribing before we get into the full breakdown. The first thing worth understanding about Ferrari's performance on Friday is that the pace wasn't limited to a single headline lap. Across both sessions, the car consistently looked composed in areas where drivers were struggling to keep the new generation of cars under control. The 2026 regulations have fundamentally changed the behavior of Formula One machinery. The cars are smaller, lighter, and rely on a very different aerodynamic philosophy combined with power units that split the energy balance almost evenly between internal combustion and electrical deployment. That also means energy management has become one of the most complex strategic elements drivers have had to deal with. That context matters when analysing Ferrari's day because the SF26 appeared unusually well behaved in precisely those areas. The most obvious example was traction out of Albert Park's slower corners. Drivers throughout the field were visibly cautious applying the throttle, particularly through Turn 3 and Turn 13, where rear stability becomes critical, but both Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton were able to apply power earlier and more cleanly than most of their rivals. That helped explain why Ferrari immediately rose to the top of the timesheets in FP1. Leclerc ultimately finished the session fastest, with Hamilton directly behind him, producing a Ferrari 1-2 that immediately drew attention in the paddock. But even beyond the raw lap time, the visual behavior of the car told an important story. It looked stable. Drivers weren't fighting sudden rear snaps. There were very few aggressive steering corrections, and the car appeared comfortable attacking curbs that were unsettling other teams. That stability aligns with what Hamilton himself has been saying about the new Ferrari. After a difficult 2025 season, Hamilton arrived into 2026 with a noticeably different tone. He described himself as feeling reset and refreshed, adding that he was still hungry heading into his 20th season in Formula One. Hamilton also admitted the previous year had been extremely difficult for him personally. At one point he said he had forgot who I was during the frustrations of that campaign, but over the winter he focused heavily on rebuilding his physical preparation and mindset. "This is the most I've ever trained," Hamilton explained ahead of the Australian weekend. "I'm in a much better place now." More importantly for Ferrari, Hamilton also spoke positively about the new car itself. He described the SF26 as much more fun to drive, particularly compared with the ground effect generation that had defined the previous rules cycle. However, he also pointed out that the energy management side of the new regulations is ridiculously complex. That complexity is precisely where experience can become valuable. A driver with Hamilton's ability to process multiple systems simultaneously, tyre management, Battery deployment, aerodynamic modes may find opportunities where others struggle to stay within the operating window. But Ferrari's strong showing on Friday wasn't just about Hamilton's perspective. Leclerc looked equally comfortable. Throughout FP1, the Ferrari driver appeared able to lean on the front end of the car while still maintaining strong rear traction on corner exit. That combination allowed him to piece together a clean lap that ultimately topped the session. It also reinforced the sense that Ferrari had arrived in Melbourne with a well-understood package. Hamilton himself hinted at that preparation. "We are so much more prepared this year," he said during the early stages of the weekend. "We're leaving behind the bad from last season." That preparation is important because early races under brand new regulations can often produce misleading results. Teams are still learning how their cars behave, discovering the limits of energy deployment strategies, and experimenting with aerodynamic settings. The fact that Ferrari looked comfortable immediately suggests the team has a reasonably strong baseline. Of course, the picture became more complicated once FP2 began. As track conditions improved and teams started running more representative programs, the order shifted. Mercedes began to show stronger pace through George Russell and rookie Kimi Antonelli. Meanwhile, McLaren eventually unlocked its performance window. That's when Oscar Piastri produced the fastest lap of the day. The Australian driver looked particularly sharp during qualifying simulations. His final run delivered a time that placed him roughly 2/10 clear of the immediate competition, which in a tightly packed field is not insignificant. Piastri's lap also reinforced the idea that McLaren's car is capable of producing strong peak performance when everything comes together. But even as Piastri topped the session, Ferrari remained very close to the front group. Hamilton and Leclerc ended FP2 in 4th and 5th positions respectively, within roughly half a second of the fastest time. That gap matters. In early practice sessions under new regulations, half a second across the top teams effectively places everyone in the same competitive bracket. And Ferrari's lap times did not appear to require a particularly aggressive approach. The drivers still looked composed. That suggests the SF26 may have more performance available if needed, particularly once teams begin focusing fully on qualifying simulations. By contrast, Red Bull Racing seemed less settled across the day. The car did not look as predictable through Albert Park's braking zones, and the overall balance appeared inconsistent across different phases of the lap. That doesn't necessarily mean Red Bull will struggle across the entire weekend, but it does indicate the team may still be searching for a clearer setup direction. When analysing practice data, the key question is always whether a team's performance is repeatable. Ferrari's pace on Friday appeared to meet that criterion. It wasn't dependent on a single standout lap. It wasn't tied to a specific run plan, and it remained visible across both drivers and both sessions. That consistency is often the first sign of a genuinely competitive car. Another important factor is driver confidence. Hamilton repeatedly emphasized during the build-up to the season that he feels more connected with Ferrari after a full year working with the team. Chemistry inside a team can sometimes be underestimated, but it can influence how effectively drivers communicate feedback and how quickly engineers can respond to problems. Hamilton suggested that relationship has improved significantly. "I'm much happier in the second year," he explained. "The connection with the team is stronger." That kind of stability could prove valuable over a long season. At the same time, Ferrari also appears to have avoided one of the common pitfalls that teams face when entering a new regulation cycle, producing a car that is extremely fast but difficult to control. The SF26 looked balanced. Drivers were able to push without constantly correcting the car's behavior. That might not produce the single fastest lap on a Friday afternoon, but it often translates into consistent qualifying performance and race pace. And that brings us back to Piastri. Because while Ferrari may have looked like the most complete package overall on day one, Piastri's performance remains a significant warning sign for the rest of the grid. Being fastest on Friday in front of a home crowd is one thing, but the way he delivered that lap suggested genuine confidence in the McLaren. If that pace holds into qualifying, Piastri could easily become the biggest obstacle to Ferrari converting its strong baseline into pole position, which creates a fascinating early dynamic for the 2026 season. Ferrari appears organised, balanced and prepared. McLaren appears capable of producing explosive qualifying speed. Mercedes is quietly hovering within striking distance, and Red Bull is still searching for the perfect balance. So after just one day of running, the competitive order already looks intriguingly open. The real question now is whether Ferrari can convert its impressive practice form into something more meaningful when the pressure increases, because practice sessions can show potential. But qualifying and the race are where that potential actually has to be delivered. And that leaves us with one final question. Did Ferrari just reveal the strongest all-round package of the new era? Or is Oscar Piastri already preparing to spoil that narrative on home soil? Let me know what you think. Do you believe Ferrari is genuinely the team to beat after day one? Or could McLaren and Piastri still have the edge when it matters most? Write your thoughts in the comments below. I'd be really interested to see how you're reading the early signs from Melbourne.